What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a brand new ENSO forecast to go ahead and talk to you guys about. We also have some more modeling. We also have some more observations to take a look at on that flank, and we're also paying attention to the potential for this thing to really start ramping up in the next week and a half or so. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's go ahead and start with what we're seeing with the observations at this current point in time. We're starting to see another wave of Sahara dust starting to move into the subtropical or tropical Atlantic. It's not nearly as extensive or nearly as large as it was like even a couple of months ago, and it's not nearly as large as it was last year or 2 years ago even. And that's what I'm looking at. This looks to me like it's going to be one of the last Sahara air bursts that's going to be moving through the tropical and subtropical Atlantic. And what this is going to do right there, it is going to suppress more tropical development in the main development region overall, but we're going to have to pay attention to that because it's going to really raise a few questions of how long can this last and what will happen, because what we're noticing is the monsoon season over the Sahel region of Africa, which is just south of the Sahara. It's the area between the tropical coast of Africa, tropical area of Central Africa, and the Sahara Desert. It's kind of your savanna area in layman's terms, essentially, if that makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, we're starting to see a much more active pattern with that. It had a little bit of a slow start, but now it's really ramping up across much of the Sahel region. So we're going to probably be seeing a lot more tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa in the next few days or so. So that's something to continue to take a look at. That's something to continue to monitor, and I will keep you updated with that here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But before we get deeper into the Sahara dust and before we get deeper into the forecasting, let's go ahead and show you what we have from the latest from the tropical ENSO forecast right there. There has been a bit of an interesting turn, which on the surface may seem like good news, but there is a little bit of a twist with this that could end up being an interesting setup going forward from here. This was published yesterday, July 19th. I wasn't able to have access to it until today, so we'll go ahead and get right through it. Essentially, I was reading this, and the probabilities of a La Nina have shrunk quite a bit based off these forecasts right here, because the NOAA probabilities in July are still calling for a La Nina being incredibly likely, starting around August, September, October, that time period right there. However, they're modeling the IRI's model probabilistic forecasts are putting that much more in doubt. At this current point in time, we're not seeing probabilities much higher than 50% for the the La Nina, while the neutrals are hovering around 40 to 45%, starting around September, October, November. That's when they're having it creeping in at this current point in time, which I think is pretty interesting considering observations are fluctuating down, and we're continuing to see that. Matter of fact, we're looking at these anomalies right now. The official forecast still has this as a positive neutral phase, but we're already looking at observations that are indicating something much cooler than what we're seeing here, and we'll show you those in a second. But the probabilistic modeling forecasts, a lot of them keep it at neutral or a weak La Nina right here, ladies and gentlemen, which overall may seem like a good thing, considering that what La Nina does is it weakens the trade winds and it weakens the wind shear. But in this case, it's not going to be the best, because what that's going to do is, yes, it's going to weaken the wind shear. In fact, we had the El Nino last year. The job it already needed to get done is done, because we're seeing a much weaker wind shear pattern, and we're seeing a much weaker Sahara dust pattern, primarily due to the fact that we're seeing a very active monsoon season in parts of Central Africa, which I'm not going to get too deep into. I already kind of talked about that. But regardless, the job's already done. The shear is weaker than average. The moisture is much greater than average. So essentially, that could be a worst case scenario, because what this kind of sets up now is kind of the perfect steering currents for our Bermuda High, which is really set up and really has kind of planted its feet in for the hurricane season. We can go ahead and show you what I'm talking about right here. That's your Bermuda High right there, ladies and gentlemen. 1029 millibars at this current point in time. Gonna have to pay attention to it. It's a relatively strong high pressure system. at this current point, but based off what I'm seeing right there, around 1029, 1033, that's what you're gonna need if hurricanes are gonna want to make landfall in the continental United States and be a greater threat to the greater Antilles over here. If you want anything stronger than that, that's gonna push it deeper into the Caribbean and maybe have it enter the Gulf of Mexico. So overall, what I'm noticing with this is what the ENSO region has done is it's strengthened the steering currents, because remember, what the El Nino did last year was it weakened the steering currents, and that's why you had so many systems staying out to sea, which very thankfully was good news from last year. Yes, we had a Dahlia make landfall in Florida, but we didn't really have much tropical landfalls from that other than like Tammy, which was a Category 1. That still impacted the Leeward Islands, don't get me wrong. There were still a lot of impacts with that, but it could have been way worse. And my concern is, considering the fact that it's already gotten the ENSO region has already gotten the job it needed done. It's strengthened the steering currents, and it's weakened the trade winds, and it's weakened the wind shear. What that's going to lead up to is a more favorable pattern for more landfalls in the western Atlantic Ocean, whether it's the Antilles, the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, Central America, the Gulf of Mexico, or even the East Coast may now be in greater play at this current point, because the steering currents aren't going to be as strong as what we were anticipating with the La Nina, but they're going to be strong enough to allow this thing to push maybe into eastern Florida, maybe into the Carolinas more. That's why the NHC was so concerned about the Carolinas right there, because of a scenario like this where you have a negative neutral region, a negative neutral phase that allows the steering currents to strengthen just enough to keep it not going to sea and maybe impacting the Carolinas or eastern Florida right there. That's what we saw in 2019 with Dorian. We saw in 2018 with Florence. So that's kind of a similar pattern to what we're seeing. But another thing I'm paying attention to is the indexes. The regions are now trending down as we're speaking. Regions 3 and 4 are now 0.2 degrees below average. This is the lowest they have been for a while, since May 25th at the very least, and I fully expect those to continue to oscillate down on a downward trend. And if we see regions 1 and 2 and regions 3 and 4 start to show that La Nina pattern right there, that's when when NOAA is going to initiate and pull the trigger and say, hey, this is officially a La Nina right now. And that'll have further indications down the road, like over the continental United States with winter and all that, but I'm not going to get into that. That's way too early to even consider that at this current point in time. But I want to go ahead and isolate regions 3 and regions 4. Regions 3 has had a slight trend to the downward right there. We're down to about negative 0.45 degrees below average at this current point in region 3. So overall, it's not been really trending as down as I'm sure a lot of the forecasts were considering. It's not even close to the minus 0.8 it was on May 25th over there. That was pretty insane. It has been oscillating up and down, stabilizing a little bit, but now we're starting to see that downward trend once again over the last couple of weeks. But region 4 has been the region that's been collapsing right there, because it's been holding usually quite steady. It's been one of those regions that hold it quite steady. I've been holding it quite steadily over the last couple of months or so. But then over the last 3 weeks or so, you're starting to see that downward trend finally starting to kick into effect, and finally starting to see that just kind of take effect and do what it's doing right there. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. Regions 1 and 2 have been pretty interesting as well. It was one of the strongest areas that was below average. But then you saw this massive surge of temperatures right there, partly due to the global sea surface temperatures warming up off the western coast of South America. But now you're starting to see that downward trend again. You're seeing a little bit of an uptick right there, but that's going to oscillate. That's typically going to happen, but that's going to trend most likely down further and further and further as we get closer to the peak hurricane season right here, ladies and gentlemen. So overall, what you need to take away from this, at least this segment of the video right here, is we're seeing less of a relatively strong La Nina pattern and more of a negative neutral or weak La Nina pattern, which would ultimately make things worse for those living in the continental United States and in the western Atlantic as well, because that kind of sets you up for the perfect steering currents to allow hurricanes to move through those regions right there. So overall, we're going to have to pay very close attention to it. at this current point in time. One thing I have been paying attention to is the 7-day change of the sea surface temperatures, not just in the ENSO region, but also in the western Gulf of Mexico, as well as in the Atlantic Basin as well. Because what I am noticing with this is, at least in the subtropical Atlantic over here, we're starting to see cooler temperatures. We're starting to see the sea surface temperatures start to drop off a little bit, which under normal circumstances, you'd think, oh my God, that's some good news right there, ladies and gentlemen. Isn't that great? Well, it is great on the surface, but the problem is now what I'm looking at based off what we're seeing. Let's go ahead and pull up the climate reanalyzer for you very quickly and kind of show you more of a better version of this right here. What I'm noticing right here, at least with the anomaly speaking and with the temperature changes right here, is we're seeing more of a concentrated area of extremely warm waters in the tropics instead of just everywhere being much warmer than average, because we're seeing some cooler than average anomalies in parts of the subtropical Atlantic over here. That is going to allow for this. That is going to allow for the steering currents to continue to strengthen and develop as they do. Keep these systems kind of concentrated in the tropical Atlantic, where we absolutely do not want them to be, because remember, we still have extremely warm water and we have extreme OHC, and we'll get to the numbers in just a second. But overall, that's absolutely the last thing we want to hear at this current point in time. And this is a similar setup from what we were seeing back in 2017 when we had Harvey, we had Irma, Maria, Nate, all those hurricanes. We had 10 hurricanes in a row that year. And it was in part attributed to just this concentration of anomalous SSTs, warm anomalous SSTs, that is, in the tropical Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. Those areas right there. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. And speaking of the climate reanalyzer right here, courtesy of the University of Maine right here, we're still seeing that surge of SSTs right there. We have seen a little bit of a decrease of the surge at this current point, but that's pretty typical at this current point in time. This is going from day to day as well, so that's why I'm looking at this. The reason I'm looking at this more or less day to day is because the days on themselves won't really amount to much, but when you start to add the days up, the sea surface temperature and surge starts to add up as well. And matter of fact, we can go ahead and go back to where we were in January. We were at the warmest that we were at sea surface temperatures ever for January, February, parts of March, and even into late April right there before it started to level off and start to compete more with the 2023 sea surface temperatures. This looks to me that it's going to either beat the 2023 SSTs or it's going to come very close to doing that, which, considering the fact that last year was an El Nino and it weakened the steering currents enough to allow a lot of these systems to move out to sea, this is pretty bad news. Because we're having pretty much the same sea surface temperatures right there, but instead of them staying out to sea, we'll have strong enough steering currents to push them into the Antilles, push them into the Gulf of Mexico, push them into land where a lot of people live, and that's not ultimately fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go ahead and show you the SSTs that we have pulled up for you right here. Let's go ahead and show you the global sea surface temperatures that we have kind of as courtesy from NOAA right here. We're seeing a lot of 30-plus degrees Celsius waters across a lot of these regions. Now, granted, you have to remember it's July 20th right there. The fact that we're seeing this warm water already is pretty scary. And now we're seeing a lot more areas of 30-plus degrees Celsius or 86-plus degree Fahrenheit waters in the Western Maine development region right here. That is the last thing you want to see right here, because what that's going to tee off is it's going to allow these the waters to continue to warm up in that region because they're not nearly as affected as tropical waves, courtesy of the Sahara dust over here, which I will get to in just a second. And essentially what it's doing here is it's kind of staying untapped, and any tropical cyclone that moves through it could take full advantage of those waters and really start to bubble up and intensify at a very fast rate. We all saw that with Hurricane Beryl, and that wasn't even peak hurricane season. That was late June and early July, ladies and gentlemen. And we're seeing that already, and I said this before and I will say it again. Beryl was a tone setter. because it did absolutely nothing to cool the SSTs. It did absolutely nothing to cool the OHC. We can go ahead and show you right there. The OHC continues to surge across much of the tropical Atlantic over here, and it continues to surge across much of the subtropical Atlantic too, which is the last thing you want to see right here, ladies and gentlemen, because what that's going to do is it's going to allow these hurricanes, if they do go out to sea and maybe potentially towards more so New England or New York or the mid-Atlantic, or like some systems tend to meander off to do, what those OHC values are going to allow to do is it's going to allow it to maintain its strength for longer periods of time and potentially put those areas at risk, which, again, quick disclaimer, I'm not saying a hurricane's going to make landfall in New England or the mid-Atlantic. Personally, I don't think it's plausible at this current point anywhere north of Virginia Beach, which, by the way, if you're in Virginia Beach, you should probably be keeping an eye on this. Just a little bit of a tidbit right there. But we'll have to pay attention to all of this right now. So let's go ahead and show you the Sahara dust that I was kind of referring to earlier, as well as the wind shear currents right here. We're going to go ahead and show you the shear and the moisture forecast pulled up for you right here, because what we're seeing with the shear is we're seeing more of a sheary pattern at this current point in time, but we are starting to see a bit of a weakening of those 40. Instead of 40, we're now seeing about 30 knots of wind shear across the Caribbean. The Gulf of Mexico has virtually no shear at this current point in time, very favorable for tropical development. Main development region is going to be up and down, up and down, up and down till the end of the month. But what we're going to start seeing a pattern of is decreasing wind shear across much of the main development region, and that, coupled with the MJO arriving in the tropical Atlantic, might just kickstart some tropical activity right there on the last few days of July. So that's where this is all kind of boiling down to at this current point. So let's go ahead and show you that right here. Starting around July 27th, July 26th or so, you start to see the wind shear really start to just weaken and get out of the main development region in a lot of those areas right there, and allow for more tropical development to potentially organize and develop, especially with the MJO coming in. You are still going to see some shear in the Caribbean Sea. That's going to be pretty typical right there, But overall, what you're going to start seeing is you're going to see all that shear start to collapse, and I would guarantee you by the first week of August, that wind shear is not there anymore. And I guarantee you by the end of the first week of August, we're not going to really see much Sahara dust anymore, because what we're starting to notice is the Sahara dust, we're already seeing about a little more than half of the Sahara dust being pushed up to Europe instead of the subtropical and tropical Atlantic, ladies and gentlemen. I know I keep saying that, but it's a bad habit. I'm working on it. But anyway, we're starting to see more than half of the Sahara dust getting pushed up to Europe right here. You're starting to see that on the models right here. Let's go ahead and go out to 96 hours out. And yes, you are going to see one more surge of Sahara dust. You're already starting to see that right now across a lot of the region right there. That is going to be that last surge of Sahara dust. But afterward, the surges are going to get smaller, and the chances for tropical activity are going to increase, especially with a more favorable environment, ladies and gentlemen. We're already seeing a much more moist environment than what we were seeing last year. We're seeing a much more moist environment than what we see on the 30-year average, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll go ahead and pull that up for you in just a second. But overall, yeah, you start to see those fewer and fewer surges of Sahara dust moving into the tropical Atlantic. Let's go ahead and pull up the precipitable water normalized anomaly right here. This based off the 30-year mean. Look at this. Look at how much more moist this is. How much moisture there is up here. And this is this isn't like a bunch of moistures right there. This is more moisture than average right here. But regardless, it's still insane to take a look at this. It's still insane to see all this stuff fire off. And it's still insane to kind of look at these maps right here and see what I'm seeing at this current day and age right here. Because essentially what this is telling me is three things right here. Number one, the SSTs are going to absolutely carry this season, and it's going to absolutely carry a lot of tropical systems to potentially rapidly intensify, coupled with the insane OHC we had. I got a comment asking if this is the most OHC or what the year the most OHC at this current point was. I think it's this year based on all the recorded data I could find. So that's pretty concerning to say the very least. The second thing I'm noticing is the Sahara dust. It's been doing a decent job of suppressing tropical activity so far, but how much longer is it going to do that? Especially with these anomalies that we're looking at. at this current point in time. And the third thing I'm taking a look at right here is everything's ahead of schedule this year. The MJO is ahead of schedule. The Sahara dust collapsing is ahead of schedule. The wind shear oscillating is ahead of schedule. We saw that with Beryl, where we had barely any shear in the Caribbean Sea, which allowed it to become annular and become a Category 5 hurricane. How many more of those are we going to see at this current point? Those are all questions that will remain unanswered until we start seeing tropical stuff fire up, and I will keep you updated on that here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to close the video out right here. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us make more videos like these. The goal of this channel, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. We're almost at 9,000 subscribers. So be sure to hit the red subscribe button. It would be much appreciated. If you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join the Discord server. Link to that is right over there. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.